Octave. Originally released in October of 2016 through indie developer Anate Studio, is a short but sweet point-and-click adventure game about death. Introducing Octave with a suitably mysterious near-death experience, you take control of an unnamed protagonist now stranded in the middle of a dark forest, after having been told virtually nothing about this character or his predicament. And this is meant very literally. Neither his identity, motivations, or history are ever truly mentioned, and as such the game begins with an immediately potent sense of intrigue, helped to no end by the game's visuals. Similarly akin to a series of moody watercolor paintings, many of the backgrounds seen throughout Octave are fantastically appropriate. They just ooze this incredibly dark and foreboding atmosphere, setting the tone of the game's introduction perfectly. And the corresponding soundscape of trudging footsteps, occasional environmental design, and droning bass tones all offer plenty to keep things in the realm of unease. It honestly comes very close to hitting a fine balance between the likes of Silent Hill and Abe's Odyssey. The uncomfortable ambience and unwelcome nature of the protagonist's situation should be plenty familiar to any fan of the survival horror franchise, whereas the continually evolving sounds of crickets, bird calls, and crunching leaves all feel extremely reminiscent at times of the strange adventures of Abe. As noted once upon a time by the wonderful Jordan Underneath when reviewing Abe's Odyssey, who now goes by the name of Jordan Go to Sleep for clarification, nature should feel mysterious. And while Octave is still a long way from hitting the brilliantly surreal environments and frankly alien imagery that Abe's Odyssey once depicted, there were still the odd moments throughout Octave's introductory chapter that felt pleasantly similar to that. Being a point-and-click title, at the very start of the game you direct the character forward exactly as you might expect, instructing him to light the candles and in doing so fill the ritualistic symbol at the bottom of the screen. However, you will soon come to notice that when aiming the mouse to direct our protagonist forward, it will on occasion start to violently shake. I wonder what that might be. So without giving away the minimal spoilers that can be afforded to a game that barely passes a 2-hour runtime, yes, this point-and-click adventure game does actually offer some fairly effective examples of horror. Of course, that's not to imply that point-and-clicks can't be an effective horror experience, but I was still genuinely surprised to be caught off guard by a few of those seen throughout Octave. It is with complete and total seriousness that I admit that this game actually jump-scared me. Not something I expected, but it certainly caught my attention, especially after having proven such an effective example of atmosphere. But I do now need to admit that when it comes to an actual story, there isn't one. So let's talk spoilers. If you'd like to skip these, here's a timestamp. Okay. So, as mentioned previously, the main character survives a near-death experience, something that I didn't actually show you in case the game intrigued you enough to stop the review and go play it first, because this isn't actually just a near-death experience, it's actually a murder, and when this nearly occurs, this happens. Now again, you don't really find out anything about this. Octave is an experience that very much relies on giving you the visuals and allowing the player to make up their own mind, which for some people can be fascinating, but in the case of Octave, it starts to become very tiresome very quickly. As the protagonist continues, he comes into contact with a series of spirits and entities, some of which are passive while others are hostile. And as far as the plot goes, when considering the evidence provided by the game, it would appear that the main character is trapped in some form of spiritual midway point between life and death. When travelling to different locations, there's truly no actual sense of direction. Things just happen, because either you made them happen or they happen to you. There's no narration or character dialogue to speak of, and the breadcrumb trail that you follow is minimal at very best. You must complete the objective, because aside from admiring the scenery, there's truly nothing else to do. And if that sounds familiar, it should. because this is effectively the premise of another game. Yes, in a lot of ways Limbo is similar, except where Limbo succeeds in creating a murky, downright oppressive experience through competent puzzles and a truly striking art style, Octave doesn't. Sure, at times it's gorgeous to look at from a visual point of view, but the gameplay is extremely lackluster. Take the house for example, the only location that really feels like the point-and-click adventure games of old. You collect items and puzzle clues and keys, but when it comes to why you actually do this, frankly, you don't know. You're doing it because there's nothing else to do. There's no character motivation to speak of beyond player control, so actually caring about it is difficult. And sure, Limbo hardly had much of a character motivation to speak of either. The boy wakes up and proceeds. But it made up for it with the art direction, the environmental design, the intrigue, and the many variety of puzzles to get past. There was more to explore from the gameplay point of view, something that Octave really lacks. And another location where this becomes sadly apparent is a trip to the literal underworld. At first, I was absolutely in love with this place. The hordes of ghostly figures watching the protagonist's journey is incredibly unnerving, and the music that swells throughout this moment is honestly quite beautiful. In spite of how dark and foreboding the situation appears to be, it's almost as if the music is conveying some small reassurance of peace and tranquility, but it also sounds undeniably lonely. And if the main character actually had something of a personality to speak of, something that the player could relate to, this scene would be infinitely more effective. Unfortunately, in spite of some additional music that really plays to the strength of the game's horror elements, the following dodging a monster sequence and boss battle both feel very anticlimactic. You need to light all of the candles to defeat this thing, even though this is the very same creature that supposedly saved you in the beginning of the game, and you're not entirely sure what's going on, you're just doing it, and again, there isn't really a why here, nothing's explained. You're just doing what is expected of you because there's nothing else to do. It's possible that the creature was in fact attempting to steal the protagonist's soul and whatnot for personal gain or demonic sustenance, and I don't know. But ultimately, once you've defeated it, exited the underworld and drive off into the sunrise, these aren't questions that you're offered much of an answer to. And don't get me wrong, I like abstract or unexplained media. In fact, sometimes these experiences can be some of the most vivid examples of horror out there. I don't need a black and white explanation for everything, but you do need to offer enough to bring the player in and keep them invested, because even at a max of around 2 hours, depending on how quickly you work through the puzzles, Octave feels like it overstays its welcome at times. Something that really shouldn't happen for such a short experience. So, all in all, in spite of some gripes in regards to the story elements and lacking gameplay, there's still a fair amount to like throughout Octave. I keep going on about the visuals and the effectiveness of the sound design because it is absolutely where this game strikes gold. Somewhere deep down, there is an excellent horror game within what came to create Octave. The understanding of what inspires dread and unease through visual design is wonderfully realised here. And if it was combined with the kind of story that really took advantage of that design and a character that the player can actually relate to, it could be something very special. But as it stands, it feels like it wastes so much potential to be so much more than what it currently is. Now sure, the game's cheap, you aren't going to be spending much on it, and I guess that's something of a free pass for some of its shortcomings, but with a little more work and inspiration, Octave could have been much more. Still, in spite of my complaints, it feels worth looking into. If you like brief horror experiences with effective imagery, go play this game. Who knows, you might like it a hell of a lot more than I do.